So for tonight's slight programming change, not sure if you got our message. Still the topic of choosing a business model. Sarah Livak from SFU will be our first lead-off speaker as planned. Second speaker was going to be Stephen Forth. He got called out of town very last minute yesterday. So we kind of figured out what to do. And Kirk Hamilton very, very graciously, with less than a day's notice, agreed to take Stephen's place in speaking. So he'll be up next. We'll follow up a little bit more on business models and do a review on the canvas. We'll talk a little bit about pricing, but we'll save the deep dive into pricing for May 25th when Stephen Forth says he will come back and give that talk that we promised you. So my last reminder is we are webcasting, so for questions, please put up your hand, and I'll bring the microphone over for you to ask questions. Otherwise, I'm going to hand it off to Dr. Sarah Livak to start us off.
Thank you very much. All right. Hi, ladies and gentlemen. I would usually start by coming out from behind my podium, but ironically, for someone who's going to be talking about a theme essentially about thinking things through, I knew I was going to wear a mic, and yet I did not wear a belt. So this thing's staying with me, and I'm told it's safer back here. So I'm very excited to be here tonight to talk about what is essentially the most useful tool, of course, that any entrepreneur will have, which is the business model. And I'm also excited to be here because, of course, I also get to talk about why universities are so useful to have at things like this, because the model that I'm going to present to you is from someone named Scott Stern, who is the guy who literally wrote the book on technology strategy, and, well, more specifically, at least wrote the seminal paper. And this is a framework that isn't widely known yet, but he came and talked at SFU, so we know about it, so I get to share it with you guys tonight. So I'm very excited about that. But I also get to tell you, of course, that this isn't all my work. But the cases are, so that's fine. So now that you know what I'm going to be talking to you about, which of course is choosing your business model, I'm going to do what I like to call the getting to know you. This part is the who is this person and why should you listen. It's very important when you teach classes. So first off, as Angie said, I'm the Director of Entrepreneurship for SFU, which means my job is to align and accelerate all the amazing entrepreneurship stuff happening at SFU, from pre-SFU all the way to early stage incubation and fantastic partners like New Ventures BC. But probably more interesting to this crowd is that I'm a business coach, so work with startup companies to go through things like business model, market strategy, et cetera. So hopefully that's helpful to you guys. And furthermore, I've done this because I got a startup company. So I come at this from 3 different angles, and I come at each one of those angles with the exact same premise, which is that I'm a huge tech enthusiast, big geek, and I will be very excited about everything that you guys are working on. So now that you know who I am, I'm just curious to know who's in the room. So how many people here are in software? Okay, we got a lot of software. How many people are in like agri-tech and food? Okay, nice. How about biotech? Yes, you are. What about sort of advanced material, clean energy, fuel cells? Okay, we're starting to get more advanced, and it's thinning out a little bit. How many people doing anything to do with social media? Well, it's fewer than I thought would happen. That's very exciting. All right, and then do we also have a range of stages? How many people, you know what, I was going to ask about revenue, and I think that's rude, so I'm not going to. So we've talked about who's in the room. I'm also curious to know what kind of problems you're trying to solve. So how many people are trying to solve social problems with the venture they have? How about environmental problems? Okay. How about health problems? Okay. So we've got some social innovators in here as well. That's fantastic. This is going the wrong way. Aha. Okay. So what are we going to be doing tonight? Very simply, first we're going to be talking about the types of technology strategy and innovation strategy and what they mean for the business models that you're going to create. Okay? Because every strategy that you have, of course, will have a different business model. Then we will go through examples. You will notice that I'm the kind of person who likes what my friends call stuff you can drop on your foot. So my examples are usually hardware-y, so I'll try to get some software stuff in there as well. And then working on your own. So we're going to turn it into a bit of a workshop at the end for how to apply these in your own ventures. with the end result being that your strategy should be incredibly compelling, incredibly strong, because you will have thought through everything that you're going to do or choose not to do by the end of this. So how many people were at Monday's session on business models? Okay, so you guys had Peter Payne. Peter is fabulous. I'm going to assume that he did a fantastic job, because he always does, and that you don't need me to go through what a business model is. Has everyone seen a business model canvas before? Fantastic. All right, so in a nutshell, the business model is the blueprint of your strategy, right? It's the pieces and how they fit together. So depending on what your strategy is, your business model should change, and what information you get. So here are things you need to consider, okay? When you're thinking about what should my strategy be. First, how fast do you have to move to get ahead? How fast is your competition going? How fast is your market changing? Okay? Are there a number of competitors out there already, or are you the first one? Are you opening up a new space? Okay? Or are there already people moving very, very quickly around you? Because this will impact everything else that you do. Then, what does a competitive or collaborative environment look like? Are there people you could partner with? Are there people who would want to partner with you, or should you be going by yourself? And this is going to be important, and anyone who's had me as a teacher, and there's a few of them in this classroom right now, knows that value proposition is probably one of the most challenging things to formulate well, and it's also one of the most important things to formulate well. So what is your value proposition based on? Okay? So for example, if you're a data company, if you're someone whose value in a company will be on getting many, many people to sign up and using their data, then your business model should reflect the fact that you need to get lots of people as quickly as possible, right? Then what options do you have for getting and keeping a competitive advantage, okay? Can you protect yourself? And does protecting yourself look like getting patents? Does it look like getting brand recognition? Does it look like having partners? Does it look like being the central hub of an innovation network? All of these are different strategies to protect yourself. Whether this is a popular opinion or not, it is not just patenting that protects you. And increasingly, that might actually be what sets you behind, which is kind of the premise of what Scott talks about. So this is the new framework. Back in the day, Scott talked about the market for ideas, which was licensing, and the markets for products. And it turns out, as the world gets more complicated, as the world speeds up, it's a lot more complicated than that, okay? Or not that complicated, because now we have 4 where we had 2. So there are 2 things that you need to think about, well, that affect your strategy. First off, what do you want to invest in? Is it important for you to control and protect your IP, invest in patenting? Will you be in trouble if other people know what you're doing? Or is it execution? Will you be safer if you just get ahead of everyone else really, really fast? What's important to realize, who here has tried to get a patent before? And how long in general does that take? Is it a quick ride to get a patent? No. Someone looks shocked in the back. Absolutely not. It is not quick to get a patent. So getting patents, getting that type of intellectual property, may be the direct opposite of being able to move fast. So you need to think these things through. The other part of this that's important to think about is your orientation when it comes to how you work with people, and more about how you see the people around you, okay? Do you want to collaborate, or do you want to compete? And what's interesting is that those are often the same people. It's up to you to decide whether people are competitors or whether they're potential partners. Because if you think about it, both have a lot in common. They have complementary capabilities. They probably have resources that would be useful to you. They have distribution channels and markets that would be useful to you. And they have similar objectives to you. So is everyone actually a competitor, or could you turn this around and move a lot faster with someone else? Okay? So all of these different quadrants are about how you view your environment and how you see yourself acting within it. And at each one of these stages, this changes what your business model canvas would look like, right? So the first strategy that we're going to talk about is the IP-based strategy. And there are many, many books and many papers written on IP strategy. the importance of the patent has been drilled into everybody's head for a very, very long time. It's very important. I must protect my ideas. I can't tell anyone, please sign this NDA, even though I only want to tell you a little bit about it, right? Clearly, I have a bias about these things. So protecting your IP means two things, right? IP-based strategy. Protect your investment through some sort of intellectual property, usually a patent, usually something very strong. And the other part of IP strategy, in this case, is letting someone else commercialize it. So you're not investing in downstream capabilities. You're investing in protecting your ideas and finding the people who can commercialize it for you. Okay? So perfectly valid. And some examples of this. How many people have heard of advanced risk machines, ARM? Okay. How many people have an iPhone? So you probably have one of their chips in your pocket right now. So advanced risk machine, or ARM, one of their chips goes in most iPhones. Okay? I call them an IP-focused venture, but the reason I have then is not because they've changed their strategy, but because they're not really a venture. Because last time I checked, they had a revenue of $968 million a year. So the IP strategy can be incredibly useful to people, clearly. ARM does not make those chips. ARM makes IP, and other people make the chips, and it goes into other people's products. Okay? What they have is very advanced technological and research capabilities. And so their strategy is based on having and continually improving that kind of technology. And there's clearly, at $968 million, nothing wrong with that. So, but what does that mean for your business model? Right? That's what we all want to know. So it means your value proposition is going to be different, right? What value are you bringing your customers? And that is rare and valuable intellectual property. This is something that they cannot do themselves and they cannot get elsewhere. So chances are you have a really significant research background, a really significant research team, right? This also changes what key resources you have. So where are you going to invest? So one of the things that New Ventures BC will want to see, I'm sure, is a very consistent business model, right, in round two and throughout that. So this is what a consistent IP-based business model looks like. High investment in IP and patents, of course, okay? And probably the people that come with it. So in the case of ARMS, they would have physicists and engineers and people like that on their team. And they would probably be fairly high-profile ones, okay? High investment in R&D and researchers. A lot of your costs are going to go to people, right, and specific people. What it also means is low investment in downstream manufacturing. If you invest in protecting your IP, you can give it to someone else and they can commercialize it for you. So you don't have to invest in factories and things like that. But all of these things are going to cost you money, so you need to factor those things in. And this is just my advice, but if you're going to invest in scientific people, get very high-quality scientific people, right? Because as a startup company, we often think about how am I going to reduce the resources that I'm working with, and then we decide to get people who are not as capable as if we paid someone a little bit more. And it will save you more money in the long run if you don't do that. So always invest in people. I think that's for every one of these things, though. So your revenue for this kind of model is, of course, going to come from licensing, right? From licensing or from royalties. What that means is you're probably getting a lower margin than your partners. But what it also means is your risk is incredibly low because you don't have a lot of investment to recoup most of the time. But another thing I should point out is that something like this, especially if you're quite advanced tech, it doesn't mean you don't invest in any technical capabilities at all. Because if it's something advanced enough that it's hard to explain to someone who's non-technical what this actually means, there's a good chance, at least at the beginning, you might have to invest in prototypes so that you can show people what you mean and why it's valuable. Okay? So especially something that's scientific and is going to take a long time to commercialize, there's probably stages of business model. So one might be you need to develop a prototype. In the next, then you need less manufacturing capabilities. So another point of advice here is your business model is likely to change throughout, right? As you get more resources, as you change your strategy, as more and more in the market becomes open to you. So it's worth thinking about not only what your business model will look like at the beginning, but what it will look like at the end. So your key partners in this case are probably going to be research organizations. Who does research? Who's going to keep you ahead of the curve? So it might be that you continue to be embedded with a university or partnered with a university or branching out and finding out who else is doing amazing research in your field. And your customers are your licensees. So your channels in this case. So how many people, out of curiosity, think that this might be a business model for them right now? How many people are thinking about licensing? Okay, so this is good to know. Your channels. So everyone remembers what channels are? Kind of marketing, awareness, after sales, et cetera. How you get people to know about what you're doing. So your channels, in this case, are probably scientific. They're probably educating people, especially at the beginning. So you might want to think about things like white papers, which are kind of like publications, but made to interest industry in science. Okay? YouTube videos. So for those of you who are thinking about the strategy, there's a fantastic company out of Cambridge, England, called Metalysis. Metalysis has a short video that explains, without revealing any IP, exactly what their process does and why it's so much better than anything else. Okay? So it's worth looking at that, because that is a very cheap way of getting people interested in what you're doing. It might also be, if you're lucky enough to have a relationship with a university, that you look to the university liaison office and get them to help you make introductions and partnerships, because they vouch for, this is excellent tech, this is excellent science. We know people who like science. You should probably meet. And of course, your customer relationships are probably going to be pretty intense, because if it's a big pharmaceutical firm, you probably want to spend some time keeping them happy, right? So even in a tech-focused business model, don't underestimate the importance of relationship people. That's important no matter what business you're in. It is really easy in any business model, in any business, for people to lose the attention of people that want to help them, right? So investing in that is always important. So questions to ask yourself. Important considerations if you are a licensing strategy. So that's about a quarter of the room, a little bit less. Who's your first partner and customer going to be? Because it might not always be the obvious person or the obvious company. If you're in a field that's big tech, the kind of people who actually license and commercialize, there's probably only a few people who are the big fish in your pond, right? If that's the case, is the big fish the hungriest fish? Is the big fish the ones that are really hungry for innovation, that need to get out there? Chances are, if you're already the market leader, you're probably fairly comfortable. So should your partner be the person who's the biggest? Should that be what you're striving for? Or do you need to find someone who has something to prove or market share to gain? Can anyone think of another reason why you might want to do it like that? Why you might want to go to not the biggest fish?
Terms.
Sorry?
How is that to terms? Manage your risk.
Terms, manage your risk? Absolutely. So if you are just starting out and you're just learning, and that is the biggest relationship you could possibly blow, do you want to start by trying that one? You might want to use other people as your test case, right? Maybe not be the nicest thing I've ever said, but at the same time, could be useful. So this also talks about what you should do to build these relationships, especially when you're licensing, because chances are you're going to need to teach people how to embed your product in theirs, or your IP in their product. So this is a direct quote from the very first company that partnered with ARM. And they said, we've got this core. It must be useful to people for something. We don't really know how you might want to use it, but we're prepared to work with you to understand it. It was a teacher-student thing, okay? So they built the relationship as essentially a co-development relationship. They got close to their partner, and they figured out their partner's needs, and then they licensed, right? So it's never as simple. I shouldn't say never, but I've never seen it be so simple as, here's my IP, have fun with that, right? You're probably going to have to work together at least a little. So the next possible strategy is all about making yourself a supplier to someone. It's all about making someone else's life better. You make yourself a supplier to someone, you make them dependent on you. You bring new capabilities to a company that might not have them without you, okay? So an example of this. So how many people, back to the clean tech people? This could be interesting to the clean tech people. Okay, so how many people here know what a ceramic lead acid battery is? Okay, so for those of you who don't, and that's totally fair because you give me software terms, I will not know them either. This is essentially a really fancy battery that doesn't corrode. It has really, really high energy, okay? So it's a very, very high performance battery. And it was created by a company called Atraverta. Now, Atraverta's strategy was come up with this really cool battery. But then here's my question for you guys. How easy is it to trial a battery for an end consumer? Don't you need something else? You need it to be in something, right? And so especially something that isn't simply, this will replace a Duracell battery, you need to think about how are people actually going to be able to trial my product and see that it's that amazing. So Atraverta took a value chain strategy. Batteries need to go in something. What are high performance applications of batteries? Cars, absolutely. I think they choose Formula One. They definitely chose motorbikes, okay? Really, really fast bikes. So the idea for Atraverta was to make someone else's product much, much, much better, okay? They didn't need a ton of intellectual property. They have some, but they don't need a great deal. And so for those of you who are not particularly interested in anything that doesn't have to do with intellectual property, this is an important strategy tip or commentary on these kind of companies. Even if you don't have a great deal of intellectual property, the argument against that might be, well, what if my partner then steals my intellectual property? Would anyone be worried about that? Yeah, maybe. But then ask yourself this question. Does a dirt bike company want to build an entire new line of capabilities if what they really want to do is get to market fast? They slot you in, and they shoot forward, and life gets easier for them. And that's the important part of a value chain strategy, right? You become someone else's capability. So the value proposition is creating something new and valuable for your partner that is easier and faster than they could do it by themselves. Your key resources are low investment in IP. That doesn't necessarily mean you don't have any patents, but they aren't the key to your success. The key to your success is execution and relationships and making life easier for people, right? What kind of intellectual property might be really valuable is building your brand as a trusted partner, as the easiest person to work with, as the solutions company, right? So your investment in people, yet again, is about service-minded people, highly networked people, those people who can find you those partnerships and keep you those important partnerships. Your finance may very well be corporate finance. You're now essentially the new capability of a company. Maybe they want to fund you for that. It has happened in many, many cases. The other place you might be able to get money is any kind of equity investor. Because you have a customer. You are important to someone. They don't want to see you fail now. And that's some pretty good market validation, right? And whether you need capital or machines totally depends on what your strategy and what it is you're selling, okay? So it might be that you build the entire battery. But it also might mean your partner is in business with you because they want to speed to market. So it might be wise for you to design something, find other people who can make the bits, put it back together yourself, and get it to them as quickly as possible, right? So in this strategy, speed is of the essence. So what this means is high costs in people, maybe some prototype in development, not so much about investing in intellectual property or traditional intellectual property. And your revenues are through sales of a component, or it could also be a service contract. You could have a long-term contract with someone, which is nice recurring revenue. Never hurts to have. You probably have a few strategic partners. So we talk about channels again. How are you going to get to these people, right? How are people going to buy from you? This is one of the questions on the New Ventures BC round 2. So you're going to want to ask yourself these questions. If you're in a value chain relationship, networks. Networks are going to be key. You're going to want introductions. You're going to want in-person sales, right? Because you need to build trust. You need to build relationships. And your partners are going to be your customers. So the strategic considerations around whether or not you'll have a value chain strategy are having good relationships. I've said it over and over and over again, still important. It's easier to work with you than to do it yourself. That is the key value proposition that you're going for if you have a value chain strategy, right? No one wants to develop that capability. You are now their capability, okay? So this is when you strive for what's called plug and play. How many people know what that means? Someone is very proud that he knows what that means. The plug and play strategy is how easy is it for me to pull out the old component and slot in my new cool thing? So does the Ebonex battery, when I take out the old motorcycle part and put in my new thing, is it absolutely seamless? That's what plug and play means. So if you're taking a value chain strategy, you want to think about how easy is this to slot into new products and to slot into my life, right? Okay. So this is the third type of strategy to think about. Yep.
I understood the strategy that partner doesn't want to steal your idea. But there's a lot of competitors that want to get into the business. Like that AMR example that you said, if Intel comes and say, I have a cheaper semiconductor, half the price, and AMR doesn't have that much IP to defend themselves, they lose the market eventually.
Absolutely. Well, that's why ARM wouldn't take a value chain strategy. ARM would take a IP strategy.
But the battery is also the same. I mean, if a battery manufacturer comes to car companies and they say, I have a cheaper battery, same performance, they might lose the market.
That's fair. I think the important part there is that if you're doing all of that off-site, you might be able to protect it with things like know-how and trade secrets rather than protect it with patents. Because the other thing about patents, of course, is that you then put that intellectual property out there so people could potentially copy it. But if you keep your IP secret and create a product, sit seamlessly in someone's product, you don't have to teach anyone else how to use it, then you're at less risk. But it also might be a trade-off. You know, none of these things are perfect. So if you want to protect your IP and if you feel threatened and you think other people can duplicate, then it's probably not a value chain strategy that would be easy for you. But if everything in your market says you must move fast or someone else will get your customer, then you probably need to choose between whether you really want to protect that or you just want other people to be so invested in you that you feel fairly safe in your partnership relationships. So you're absolutely right. There is no silver bullet with any of these. They're trade-offs. Absolutely. Does anyone else have questions since we're like halfway through? All right, we'll keep going. So the next strategy, called an architecture strategy, is, or sometimes a platform leadership strategy, is probably the hardest one to do, okay, as a startup company, and as a company in general. Because what an architecture strategy means is you are the ecosystem leader for an entire sector, okay? So you are the person not only doing technical development with everyone, you're deciding how that sector is going to move, okay? So this is going backwards now. These are the kind of people we think of when we think of platform leadership, okay? So a quote from a book called The Keystone Advantage talks about Microsoft and it says, like Walmart, Microsoft's performance is linked to its vast network of business partners. With these kind of strategies, software, platform, if you're not in with Microsoft, if you don't run on the Google platform or the iOS platform or the Microsoft platform, it's going to be challenging for people to adopt you, right? So if Microsoft decides they're going to make a change, everyone else changes with them, okay? So it's a very safe place to be. But it's also a place you don't get to be without a huge amount of clout and a huge amount of resources, okay? So we can strive for this later, It's a challenging thing to do by yourself with very few resources. So your business model, if you're an architecture leader, is the value is in the platform. Everyone uses the platform. You're incredibly safe, right? There are a lot of people who strive to be the platform, and you can be the platform in up-and-coming areas. But there are very few people who are going to take on Microsoft as far as platforms for running your computer. People try all the time, but it takes a little while. So if you're going to do this, and I will get to why this is still relevant if you're a startup in 1 second, invest heavily in intellectual property and in R&D, right? Because you don't want anyone to be able to develop without you, right? So you probably have a number of research collaborations. You invest in integration. You make yourself easy, hopefully, make yourself fairly easy to integrate into, right? So it's easier to work with you than without you. In this case, funding probably comes from internal, because if you're this big, you have money. Let's be fair. And you invest in partnership development. So it might be working with universities, and you invest in marketing. You might become the platform of choice. So if you're someone who's interested in, say, 3D printing, you might think about being the 3D printer that is supplied to schools. Why? Because they learn how to use it. And then you're the de facto standards when they get out and introduce that technology in a new business. So this kind of model is not irrelevant for a startup company if you're an emerging business, because you can set yourself up to be the platform, depending on how you market, right? So revenue. You're probably in product versions and product pipelines. With an architecture strategy, you do not want to have just one product and everyone adopts it and then you make no more money, which is very, very annoying to those of us who have any kind of software platforms that they have to update every 3 seconds. But for these companies, this is a fantastic source of recurring revenue. And then your channels are probably through education, through sponsorship. How do you make yourself integrated into people's lives? That's how you do an architecture strategy. And you probably have lots and lots of customers, and your relationships are all based on market control. If you are a Microsoft person, it is hard to switch over and all of your stuff to switch over to Apple, right? Because we invest in that whole ecosystem with lots and lots and lots of partners, okay? So I'm bringing out more stuff and more frameworks, so you can tell I work at a university. The considerations for these kind of models of whether or not you can pull this off are how many resources do you actually have? How much power do you have? How much clout do you have? How many friends do you have? These are not necessarily the same thing, right? Especially if it's a new ecosystem. Do you have the ability to create a vision for what the world will look like and make yourself integral in it? You probably need really big friends for that. And this is the other reason that this kind of strategy is not irrelevant for a startup company, okay? If you can be friends with someone who has this kind of power and clout, you can sort of use a value chain strategy to jump into an architecture strategy. You just have a really big best friend, okay? So if you're someone who wants to see an entire ecosystem shift with their product, but probably doesn't have the clout on their own, I've got another exciting tool for you that I have borrowed from a gentleman named Rod Adner, who wrote a book called The Wide Lens. So if you guys are super curious entrepreneurs, which I'm sure everyone is, it is one of the best strategy books that I've ever read. And I've read tons of them. So this is a big compliment. So this is a very, very simple framework for figuring out if you don't have the power to lead, who does? Okay? It's simply called Leadership Prism. And it's a cost-benefit analysis that you just essentially weigh. There's no particular thing that these numbers are linked to. That goes, this is going to be really good for this person. It's not going to cost them a ton. Do they have a surplus? And if they have a big enough surplus, you can probably convince them, if you have good salesmanship skills, to work with you. This is often done if you have an advanced material company or something that's so far up the pipeline that it's really challenging for someone to move that ecosystem ahead by themselves. You get a really good friend, and you do it with them, okay? So our very last strategy is probably something that I bet most of you think that you could explain to me, which is a disruption strategy, because we love creative destruction and other things that sound very, very cool. So a disruption strategy is all about speed. It's all about execution, and it's all about very, very good execution, okay? So we always talk about disruptive innovation. It's a very sexy word. But who is this person who does the disruption strategy or should have a disruption strategy? Who knows who this is? Yeah. There's a couple of people who are very big fans of this. So Dropbox is an excellent example of a very good disruptor. Okay? When Dropbox pitched to a venture capitalist, do you know how far along they were in their development cycle? They had a PowerPoint presentation that showed what this might look like. That was the whole range of their development. Maybe I got told that story and I just believe it, but it sounds fantastic to me. Anyway, the Dropbox strategy was all about, I will have a very big dream, I know I can execute on it, so I'm going to move very, very fast, and I'm going to get out in front because I can see a need for this. I can see how much it's bothering people to be emailing back and forth multiple versions of stuff to a team and getting confused. So I will build this thing, and it will solve needs, and enough people will get on board. So this is important for those of you who have a data strategy. Enough people will get on board so that you end up with all of the customers, and there's no reason to switch from you, right? So a lot of data plays and social media plays that all hinge on you having all of the users, right? But if you're going to get all of the users, you better move fast, and that is going to influence what your revenue model is, that's going to influence what your marketing model is, and that is going to influence where you spend money. So your value proposition, of course, if you're going to be a disruptor, if you're going to have enough cool factor, enough performance to jump out that far ahead, you better be a lot better than the competition. This strategy is not for those who are incremental improvement. This strategy is for those who make a big jump, okay? So really think about how big a need you're actually solving. Are you solving a really significant pain? Because if you are, this might be a strategy for you. Your resources and costs are not in traditional IP, okay? PowerPoint deck, enough said. Substantial investment in creating demand, right? Working really, really quickly to have lots and lots of customers. I have no idea why it's coming up in this order, but that's okay. Investment in development, right? That's also going to be very important. How fast can you get this thing working? But also, how fast can you get this thing working well? Because how many people here have read Crossing the Chasm? You should all read that book. It's called the Bible of Entrepreneurial Marketing for a reason. It's also one of my textbooks, so little plug. But it's really important, especially in this case, to think about that strategy, which is all about how we get innovation into practice, okay? Because if you awaken demand, you move really fast, you awaken a market need, and then you do not deliver properly, someone else will jump in and deliver for you, right? So in this strategy, you have to be fairly sure that you're going to not only be able to move quickly, but also deliver very, very well. This type of model is incredibly well suited to equity funding and venture capital funding, okay? Moving this fast is not usually something that you can bootstrap, as much as I love anyone who tries to bootstrap things. Venture capital is often called rocket fuel. These kind of companies are the rockets. They're the ones that can handle that kind of fuel, okay? Because you need to move so quickly. Your revenue is by product. However, you should think about your revenue model not only in how you're going to get money, but how are you going to generate demand? How are you going to get as many people as possible using this thing? So a freemium model works really well. So this is free for most people, and if you like it so much you need extra storage space, here, have some more. Works very well for a lot of people, right? It might also be free trial. Those kind of things work very well too, especially if there's lock-in. In the case like Dropbox, you have to upload all your files. So once you have them there, you probably don't want to move them back, right? Your key partners are likely to be marketing partners. So did anyone have Dropbox and a Canon camera? Okay, so Dropbox had a partnership for some reason, and I'm going to tell you the reason actually, with Canon cameras. I got a new camera, I plugged it into the computer, and it said, oh, hey, would you like more space on Dropbox? It's free with your Canon camera. And all of a sudden you went, hey, if I hadn't known about that product, I would now. But now I'm going to put pictures on it, so I guess I need more space. They also had models that worked well for referral. You want more space? Refer more friends. Right? Worked out very, very well. So your channels are all going to be about getting more and more people to have your product. So they might be social media. They might be referrals. Right? You need a large, large market base with this. Right? You need to move quite quickly and capture as many people as you can. Because again, with these kind of platforms, if everybody's on it, nobody wants to switch. So your money is going into marketing, your money is going into development. And your relationships are one-to-many. So here's the important things to consider if you're going to use a strategy like this. First off, performance and execution are key, right? IP is not the key to this. Then beware poor execution. Because if you don't set up barriers to entry, you lose your advantage, okay? If you have this kind of competitive advantage, you will have to work to keep it, right? And you need to keep abreast of customer needs. I would really like if Dropbox had a Canadian server. That would make my life a little bit easier. But there you have it. So now that I've talked about this for a little while, you guys all know what a business canvas is. Let's try this. Who has their business model canvas with them? Who has a piece of paper? Who has a computer? All right, so those who have a piece of paper, get out a piece of paper. Those who have their computer, get out canvasizer.com. What I want you to do is choose the type of strategy out of the 4 that I've just talked about, whether it's an IP strategy, architecture strategy, or the other 2 strategies. They're right here for you. And identify which one of those you think your current strategy is. And then compare it to the considerations that we just talked about. Whether you need to move fast, whether you can protect IP, whether you have the resources to, whether there are appropriate partners. And think about, are there pieces that you need to add to your strategy now? Okay? So I'm going to walk around for about 5 minutes while we do that, answer questions. Okay? All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to wrap up. How easy was that to do? Was that a useful thought exercise? So even if you decided that your first strategy was right, you still know why you're not doing and are able to explain why you're not doing what you're doing, right? I was going to get everyone to then turn to the people around them and talk, but you guys did that already, which worked out absolutely fine for everyone. So here's my recommendation. I was going to talk about my company, but we're almost out of time. So this is not always straightforward. A lot of the questions I had were, can I patent and be fast, right? And those are fairly mutually exclusive. Do I just need lots of resources? What should I, and the next question was, what should I do? And the question is, I don't really know because I don't know your industry, right? And I don't know your company. So you're the best person to make that. All I can do is ask you good questions, hopefully. So my last word on intellectual property were, be aware that not everyone shares the same opinion on it, okay? So usually the answer, easy answer to the question, what is your barrier to entry, what's going to keep people from copying you is, I have a patent, right? It's an easy answer. It makes investors feel safe, right? This idea is definitely novel. You can get a patent around it. You can protect it. And if you go bust, I still have the patent. So maybe we can sell it to someone and make some money, right? But then having that patent, having many patents, might slow down your execution, right? So it is the trade-off. But you need to know that investors do like IP, so they could push you in that way. So hopefully you know an investor, if you're trying to get investment, you know an investor who knows how to invest in your kind of industry. Okay? So if you have to move really fast and they're pushing you for patents, it might be that you don't have the right investor. Okay? You can always fire your investors, well, before you take their money, right? It's a lot harder to do after. So in summary, there are 4 usual ways to compete as far as technological strategy go, and they all impact your business model. what resources you need, what human resources you need, what your value proposition will be, who you partner with, all of those pieces, how you make your revenue, okay? So being consistent with those is going to really help you, not just in real life, but in the new Ventures VC competition, because you're going to be very, very consistent, okay? So to repeat, you've got to think carefully about a few things. What are you competing on, okay? What resources do you have? And because we're entrepreneurs, we also think about what resources could you get or leverage from someone else. Let's be fair. All resources at your disposal are not all that are controlled by you. Then, where should your money be going? Do I need development people? Do I need market people? Do I need relationship people, right? How fast do you have to move? Is someone coming up behind you? Is there about to be a market leader? Could that be you? And how easy is this to copy? And the question also is, does it matter how easy it is to copy if you've moved fast enough that there's no point? And then, if you need potential partners, what do they value? So here's my parting advice for you guys. If I were going to give you homework, I would say, don't stop at having done 2 strategies. Decide what your company would look like if you had tried those other 2 strategies as well. Because if you do that, you will probably have anticipated almost any question that someone will throw at you in the many, many, many pitches that you will make along the way on your road to go from venture to commercial success, okay? So this is one of the keys. This is one of my favorite points to leave you with. It is just important to know why you're not doing what you're not doing as to know why you're doing what you're doing. Okay. And so thanks very much, and I think it's time for a break.
Thanks, Sarah. If you have a question, you can stick around for questions during the break. Yeah, okay. So we'll take a quick 5-minute break to just do a changeover of speakers, and Kirk Hamilton will be up in about 5. Thanks. Okay, on to part 2. We'll do it in about 45-ish minutes. I just took another 5 minutes away from Kirk. He's like, what are you doing to me? So Stephen Forth emailed me yesterday morning, said he had to go to New Jersey, so I knew he was telling the truth, to meet with a client of a really big company. So he said, Kirk Hamilton's the guy. So he called him up for me. Kirk said yes, which I was actually quite shocked by because he had less than a day's notice. And now he's here. So he's going to present kind of a follow-on to what Sarah talked about, and I'll let him take it from here. Thank you very much, Kirk.
Thank you, Angie. Everybody hear me okay? Good. So I'm actually an investor in Stephen's company, so I have a very vested interest in actually him going and meeting with this customer, and I guess he knew that, twisted my arm and said, please do a stand-in. So I've got a few slides here and want to get through them fairly quickly. I saw your responses about the different, of who you were and whatnot, so here's who I am. I'm currently coaching and working as an EIR for the Foresight Clean Tech Accelerator. Also an angel investor in about 5 companies in and around Vancouver and 1 down in the valley. And I had been doing this for the last 5 or 6 years here in Vancouver. Prior to that, I had a 30-year sentence in Toronto and Points East, working there, doing startups, doing turnarounds, working for large companies like GE and Bell, and doing some startups in the telecom world in Canada, Brazil, and Venezuela, and then more laterally doing a turnaround of a large company that manufactures the equipment that makes your credit cards, ID cards, and things like that, which was a really fun, exciting business. It was scattered around 6 countries, sold in 100 countries. We had about 35 or 40 different channel partners around the world, and I had lots of fun, but spent my life on airplanes. So happy to be here in Vancouver and happy to be contributing to the technology scene here, both the startup community as well as the new community. So let's talk about some key themes that I want to go through, and I'm going to go through these slides very quickly with the knowledge that you're probably going to have a copy of these slides later, because there's a fair amount that I wanted to cover. And I'm trying to take a little what Sarah provided you as kind of a business model strategy, if you will, or a model strategy that you might have for a technology company, and try to put this into some practical terms about how you can actually make some decisions about creating value or extracting value actually from customers through your pricing plans. So some key themes here that I want to touch on that we'll come back to, and Stephen's going to talk more about this a little bit later. But I want to make sure we get the wheels turning in you. So you've got about 3 or 4 weeks before you're going to meet Stephen again. You can start thinking about your pricing plans and fire tons of questions at him when he actually comes here. Okay, so for what is value, right? Well, value is all in the eyes of the customer. And so it has nothing to do with your costs, your input costs. It has nothing to do with how cool you are in the digital world space. And every value decision or equation is a relative one. There's always an alternative out there in the marketplace. And I really encourage you, after listening to Sarah's talk, to actually study Michael Porter. If you're not familiar with his really seminal work called Competitive Strategy that he came out with in the mid-1980s, it is absolutely a classic which has been reissued in various articles. There's a very, very sort of shortened article in the Harvard Business Review a few years back, probably maybe 10 years ago now, where he revisits it. And it's absolutely critical to review that to understand what strategy that Sarah was talking about you actually want to apply in your business. And so there is always an alternative. It might be a competitive alternative. It might be a substitute alternative. It might actually be a do-nothing alternative. You may have to try to motivate the customer. Your product may be so new or novel that really, it's hard to really see what your competitor is. There should always be a competitor there, and if there isn't a competitor there, then you may want to actually ask yourself, is there actually a market? The third key point here is that most decisions to buy, I will say, is an emotional decision. People are making a commitment based on the emotional appeal of your product, not the technical appeal, and probably not the actual economic appeal. And I don't want to make a sexist comment here, but I will say that women tend to be a much better judge of that than men. For years, as an engineer, I was taught function, 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 and value, and couldn't figure out, I got lots of yes, gee, your product is nice, I like your product, but people never bought it. And so people buy it because of the actual emotional appeal or the emotional need immediately now in the next 3 months or the next 3 minutes to buy the product. They then rationalize that decision based on the economic value that you're creating for you. Okay? So keep in mind that you must have that emotional appeal to close the sale. Right? People will do a lot of nodding and say, yeah, looks like good value, looks like good value, looks like good value. Probably try to grind you down on price and all that sort of stuff. And then they say, okay, well, I'll buy it because I've got this good deal right now. Right? But emotion definitely comes into it. So what's your value? Because you can't price without knowing what your value is. And you have to talk to customers to understand what value is being conveyed to them with your product and service. And so your value is a combination of all the benefits that you're providing, that you've articulated, hopefully through a customer discovery process of a conversation of what they're doing, minus all of the weaknesses and costs that the customer has to change their way of doing things to your way of doing things, or your product, or to adapt it, to be trained, right? Buy a new computer, and do I really want to upgrade to that next version of Microsoft? Because that means I have to now learn it all. So I put it off, and I put it off, and I put it off, right? And your weaknesses. What are the bugs in it? Maybe people don't even know me. I'm a totally newbie in the marketplace, so there's a risk associated with that. That's a weakness. And then, of course, how much are you charging for the product? So those are the costs. Those are the detractors from the value that changing to your product makes. So the net value is your value that you're creating in the marketplace by your offering, which is your total value of benefits that you're providing, less your costs, is the net value. And that that net value at the bottom darn well better be a positive one, right? If it's negative, you're not going to get a whole lot of traction. So if we think of what are the things that create value? Well, we've got financial changes, improved revenues, reduced costs, increased profits. We've got operational efficiencies in terms of being able to do things faster, cheaper, better. That's what a lot of technology does, is it actually enhances that productivity purchase. There's risk, mitigating risks, so all sorts of things that you can be doing that could be making it easier, that could be making it safer in terms of doing a transaction on a transaction on the internet, for example, or a transaction with your phone, and in the financial capabilities that you can, things that you can do with your cell phone or with your credit card or whatever. But it also is clearly the emotional. Right? These are the things I said that actually hook customers in terms of to actually make a purchase from you. And so there's satisfaction increases in terms of both the user as well as the user's employer, so the customer and the actual employee. There can be time savings. Maybe, they don't actually lay anybody off, but they're able to do something else. And so they actually can do more things. They can make it easier. Maybe it's easier to integrate. Maybe it's easier to use. Maybe it's easier to train, simpler to train. All sorts of ways that you can convey value. Maybe it's easier actually just to get service. Right? Maybe it's after the person gets it and they're using it on an ongoing basis, they can actually get some key benefits. And how does it improve in your relationship? Well, Facebook is a classic example of this. Right? How has that improved your ability to keep in touch with friends without dropping them notes or stickies or whatever we used to do pre-Facebook days? Right? Email, also texting, all those types of things that have actually made our connectivity so much easier. So how do we determine, or how does a customer really determine whether you're it or whether they're going to stay there? So if you've gone through the positioning statement, which I think you did probably 2 or 3 weeks ago with Ralph Turfus, you took that course, he talked about the positioning statement and having to, first of all, identify a burning need that was out there, an absolute hurt, something, a pain that you have to solve in the marketplace. And so both you and your competitors are actually solving that pain. And so you're on par with that. That's called, really, positioning your company or your product as to where you are in the marketplace, what markets you're serving, what pains you're fixing, right? But then we get into the added values. What's your customer or what's your competitor doing that's out there, or the alternative? And then what are you doing out there? Well, the wow factor is really what you want to capture, right? How big a wow do you have? How big a gain over the competitors do you actually have? That is a moment of truth discussion with your customer that you need to have as you're building your business case. Because those types of discussions are the things that actually help you design your business model. Choose which strategy you're going to employ. Choose what type of customer service you're going to provide, what type of channel you're going to use to reach your customer, as well as what feature you might put in to your service. So you win when you actually have created that wow. And the bigger the wow, the faster you're going to attract customers to the marketplace. So when does a startup win? Well, when your value is significantly greater than competition. All right? So what's the view from the customer? Let's think what they value. In terms of a study that was done to understand where the sources of value, customer value, were in their minds, in descending order, the first one was your product, the top one was your product or service. The second one was your company, the company that they were purchasing from. And the third one was the people that they were actually dealing with in the company. So the decision-making process by the buyer is really, first of all, the best differentiated value. In other words, they'll put up with other things if the differentiated value is there. Secondly is the lowest price, and third is the lowest risk. So what does that mean for a startup? You only win when you have a huge wow factor in your product or service. You're a startup company, so nobody knows you. You're high risk. They don't know you as individuals or people, so they're not going to readily just come along and buy from you. Your website isn't known or whatever, right? So you have to have a very impactful products, I'm going to call it product service bundle, which means that, yeah, you've got a very good product out there, but you're backing it up with great service that is going to allow you to win and outsell your competitors. And if you take, this is not just applicable to startup companies. If you take Warren Buffett's view of the world, what does he invest in? The true value investor. He invests in companies that he says has a moat around it. That moat is a very protected wall of great customer service, great innovation, whatever that particular strategy is, as Sarah was articulating, they're executing on that strategy very, very well because they've either got unique IP, they've got unique execution capabilities, right, and getting out there into the marketplace. So what is it that you're going to do that's actually going to build this moat around you so that you grow without being threatened by competitors? So how many people was it who had taken the business model canvas? Hands up. All right, so I'm going to cover a little bit of the business model canvas for those of who are here who haven't seen it, and I'm going to refer you to the book in case you haven't seen it. It's not just the canvas, there actually is a book that you should review. Everybody, how many people have this book? It's a Bible. Okay? I use it with startups, I use it with very mature companies because it's absolutely essential in looking at your business model every single quarter. We do this. Every single quarter we look for ways to innovate on the business model so that we drive change, drive more value in terms of our approach to the marketplace or in terms of our costs and therefore drive more value to our shareholders. So who knows the definition of a business model? Yep. Yep.
A business model is the way that you can provide your product to the customers and make revenue.
Okay. So it's the way that you can provide your product to customers and derive revenue. Okay? Pretty close. Let's put it this way. It describes the way that you create value, organize and create and deliver and capture value. So that's the way delivering value to customers, to the marketplace, capturing value for your shareholders so that you can stay in business, right? Everybody wants to stay in business. You can't live on investors forever. All right, so if we think of what it does, it really is central to organization. We have technology. Everybody, we're all technology entrepreneurs, right? We're all geeks. So we have technology out here. We just talked about how we can craft a strategy. Now we've got to put some people together. The business model describes how we actually pull it all together into a plan, all right, that creates value. So, as I said, business model canvas or business model generation by Osterwalder and Pigneur, an excellent tool. Describes the business model canvas, but also gives you multiple examples of different types of business models. Things like Google, a two-sided business model where you've got a free component and a paying component. Large businesses where they are deconstructing them, like telcos, where they actually have three business models in one. And things like Skype, where they have basically evolved their business model over time and continue to generate tremendous value, just it's been sold about 3 times. So it really does give you an idea of how much value has been created. So I'm going to pull up see if I can I make this go?
An organization's business model can be described with 9 basic building blocks: your customer segments, your value proposition for each segment, the channels to reach customers, customer relationships you establish, the revenue streams you generate, the key resources and key activities you require to create value, the key partners, and the cost structure of the business model. But it's not sufficient to just enumerate the 9 building blocks. What you really want to do is to map them out on a pre-structured canvas. This is what we call the business model canvas, a tool that helps you map, discuss, design, and invent new business models. Let's briefly go through the 9 building blocks, starting with the customer segments. These are all the people or organizations for which you're creating value. This includes simple users and paying customers. For each segment, you have a specific value proposition. These are the bundles of products and services that create value for your customers. The channels describe through which touchpoints you're interacting with customers and delivering value. The customer relationships outline the type of relationship you're establishing with your customers. The revenue streams make clear how and through which pricing mechanisms your business model is capturing value. Then you need to describe the infrastructure to create, deliver, and capture value. The key resources show which assets are indispensable in your business model. The key activities show which things you really need to be able to perform well. The key partners show who can help you leverage your business model, since you won't own all key resources yourself, nor will you perform all key activities. Then once you understand your business model's infrastructure, you'll also have an idea of its cost structure. So with the business model canvas, you can map out your entire business model in one image. This works for startup entrepreneurs just as well as for the most senior executives.
Okay, that was a very quick introduction to the business model canvas. And okay, so let's give you an example of the iPod. How many people have seen this business model of the iPod? A couple of you. All right, so before the iPod, anybody remember what was out there? Diamond Reel, ring any bells? No, you're all too young. There's a few. Come on, you're fessing up. Okay, I can tell. So before that, we had all sorts of kludgy things like the Sony Walkman, and you carried a DVD on your side and did all sorts of things like that. Not quite as convenient. So Apple had the grand idea of let's create this seamless music experience so that you could take all of your music, store it into a device, and play it wherever. So they were appealing to the mass market. So their customer segment, not a whole lot of segmentation going on here. They didn't care what music you had. They didn't care whether you wanted to listen to Beethoven or jazz or the Beatles or whatever. They were going after the mass market. And their channels, well, they started out really just selling through retail stores. They didn't actually have Apple stores. But they started with going through apple.com, and they started with retail stores. And the iTunes store came along a little bit actually after the iPod. They put in, those of you who are early users of iTunes will remember that when you got your ordered from iTunes, the music came in, and there was no way of getting that music out of the iTunes catalog. It was locked in there. So they embedded switching costs, made it very hard for anybody else to create a different scene, particularly make it hard for Microsoft. In fact, there was a very large row that went on at Apple where Steve Jobs was actually overruled and almost slit his throat when the team decided that they were going to allow iTunes to be compatible with PCs, with Windows. He wanted to keep it on Apple, even though Apple at that point in time had less than 3% of the marketplace. It would have been the death knell of this. They had the Apple mark, right? The love mark, as we refer to, that people were very, like Apple has always had tremendous brand loyalty ever since like 30 years practically. Who did they have to actually create some relationships with? Well, they had to actually, there's no point in having an iPod unless you can actually get some music. So they had to create some deals with record companies. If you recall, that wasn't an easy thing for them to do. There was a long time where you could not buy any Beatles music through the iTunes store. Why? Well, we were talking about intellectual property. There was a little dispute going on between Apple Records and Apple, the computer store. It took a long time. I think it took about 6 years for that to settle. OEMs, so their business model was quite novel. They didn't actually make their product. They weren't like Sony, and they weren't like Sharp, and they weren't like Diamond Rio. They didn't actually make their product. They bought their product. They went out to Foxconn, who was a contract manufacturer, and produced it. In fact, they weren't even the designer of the product. They outsourced the design of the product to Ideal. Ideal is a San Francisco design shop, tremendous design shop, but they were the ones that actually got things going. What was their key strength was contents and agreements, i.e. content, the music, as well as the design of the hardware, or call it the manufacturing or fabrication designs, and the iTunes software, which they did develop. Their key and their brand, and people, but also, what were their key activities? Well, hardware design, making sure that it worked. Marketing, definitely, big marketing push. If you recall the original iPod ads, they were plastered on billboards all over with, 2 colors. These white buds coming out of the thing and hanging on to the iPod machine. So their cost structure were some people, obviously manufacturing costs, because they had already outsourced all of that, and their marketing and sales costs. So what about their revenue? Any ideas? They got a little bit of revenue from music. If they're actually selling a single song on iTunes, they hardly made a dime. It's all hardware revenue. If you've just read the recent results from Apple, they are a huge hardware shop. They are dependent upon revenue from hardware. They have just kind of peaked in terms of their hardware revenue. Their strategy is all about high margin revenue, locking you into an ecosystem and selling you a very high margin product. They have less than 20% of the smartphone marketplace in terms of unit sales. They have over 50% of the profit margin generated by the entire industry. So you have to ask yourself the question, why are you buying an iPhone when many other phones at much less cost, much lower price, will do the same thing, virtually the same thing? I know it doesn't have the Apple love mark on it, but it's there. Okay, so if we look at the segments, I'm going to fly through these very quickly because of time, but we have to look at the customer segments. The more key thing here, the more specific, the better. The more clearly you can describe the customers in ensuring that they are in a segment. In other words, they reference each other. They have exactly the same needs. They buy at the same price. They buy the same volume, and they probably buy through the same channels. The more clearly you can articulate that, the better chance you have of actually understanding what value you can create for that customer, therefore how you can get going and price your product. What's your value proposition? As I said, you're going to the wow is the differential in value that you're creating for your client. So how is it that you are going to generate that wow for them? What is it in the product that you're delivering? The elegance of the product, the way you're servicing. Take, for an example, Build Direct, Vancouver-based company. Startup, really, a startup company. Started about 15 years ago, I think 1999. Here's a company that's coming into a huge market dominated by Lowe's, Home Depot, Canadian Tire, Rona, all these other guys. And what problem did they solve? They solved the problem of a very, very long supply chain to the builder. 5 layers in the value chain. And they said, we're going to go direct to the builder. But how did he actually capture the value? He said, you don't like my product? You can send it back within 30 days and I'll give you a full refund. I won't give you any credit on your purchase. You pay me cash now, but I'll give you full money back within 30 days. You don't like the color, you don't like the quality, it doesn't fit, whatever, that's fine. Oh, and by the way, the other criteria, you got to buy a pallet full. And don't ask me for any help about how to install it. I trust that you're a builder and you know how to do it, right? But they have built, a $300 million business in about 10 years by really understanding how he can wow his customer, which is the builder. I'm going to say probably more the small builder, contractor, renovator, who is trying to actually do a good job for you in terms of fixing your home, building your home. So what is it that you're going to do that's going to create that wow to allow you to capture value? Channels, the simpler the better. Keep in mind that a market segment buys through one channel. When you're starting your business, you don't need to figure out 15 different channels of how to get to your customer. Figure out the one that is of value, the customer that's of value. How does he want to buy your product? There's lots of stages along the way, or lots of channels that are different elements of the selling process. Make sure you're addressing all of those elements, not just one of them. Customer relationships, absolutely critical in terms of the following of a brand once it's been established. So how are you going to build that brand trust? The stronger the relationships, the better. How are you going to go out of your way initially to figure out how to serve and support and install and train your customer on the use? How are you going to maximize the engagement that your customer has with your product? It's all fine to get a sale, but what happens if they don't use it? Last company I ran, we were building these nice big, long, high-speed machines to create your smart cards, and the gang in New Jersey and the plant in New Jersey was really happy with the fact that they had sold a couple of major accounts. So I went to visit I couldn't figure out why there weren't any more sales coming along, so I decided I'd trundle off and go and visit some of these key accounts. These guys run factories of 100,000 square feet that are just chunking out loyalty cards and credit cards and gift cards and whatnot by the millions every week. And so this fellow said, we like your price, but your machine doesn't work. We run it for a little while, it breaks down, we fix it, breaks down, fix it, breaks down. Well, the key problem I find was that I go into the manufacturing plant, they did a test for 30 minutes. Well, my customer wants to run it for 7 days a week, 24 hours a day, and get some use out of it. So even if you're in the product business, you're actually in the service business, because if there's no utility to your product, then you're not delivering value. Okay? It's not a museum piece that's going to go out there. Revenue streams. How can you create predictable revenue streams? Absolutely critical. And on the left side, we have resources, activities, partners, and the cost structures, which are, at this point in time, all the internal things that you have to consider in implementing those strategies that Sarah was talking about in terms of what are the resources, where are the people going to go, what are they going to be doing, can you partner or do you not partner? So initially, I think most of you are startups, should all be pretty well startups in New Venture BC. All of these things are hypotheses. Create a hypothesis, write a hypothesis, then start to validate it by doing your customer discovery, by talking to customers and finding out what their view of the situation is. What are they doing about your competitive products that you know are competitors, about substitute products? How do they like to buy? How can you innovate on these things and convert those from hypotheses to facts? So in your business model, you really have an internal assessment on the left-hand side and a market-facing assessment or a customer assessment where all your source of knowledge is going to come from the customer. These are internal things that you can align, resources that you can align with money, with partnerships that can give you lift, can make it easier or faster for you to get into the marketplace, et cetera. But you can only execute on these once you understand the market side of the equation. So the market side really gives you the value, and the internal defines what your cost or efficiency characteristics are. You want to continuously look to improve your value of your business. As I said, when I'm coaching businesses, we run through the business model canvas every quarter, look for opportunities to drive additional value in the marketplace or in the business. Externally, we're looking for more value to create in customers to solidify our competitive position. And internally, we're looking for creating ways to create more value for shareholders or more value that allows us to grow faster, that allows us to retain some of the profitability and reinvest it into the business, which in itself is generating more value for shareholders. So how many of you have heard of the Kano model? A couple of you. So I want you to consider this, read up on it. It's actually a great way of explaining why sometimes people get traction and why they don't get traction, why people have churn and why other people don't have churn. So the threshold attributes that are here, they're kind of just table stakes. That's the part at the bottom of that value set that I said equates to the competitors. If you're not doing that, you're not in the game. Okay, that's the basic thing of satisfying a very basic need. The performance attributes are things that drive or give greater value with more use. So these are expected gains. And if your performance attributes are steeper than the competitor, that's a great thing, right? Because the more they use it, the more benefit they're going to be getting. But the other one that should not be ignored are the excitement attributes. Those are attributes that actually engage and create love for your product. It means that they won't give it up. You've seen the ads where, no, I don't want to. I think it was Toshiba that had the one. I'm not going to give up my computer. And there's a great little blog out there that talks about the Apple Watch and says why you're going to be frustrated with the Apple Watch, but you're going to buy it anyway and keep it anyway. Because it does some of the basic things. It misses on a couple of pieces. So there's some detractors from it. I think if you have a tattoo on your arm, it doesn't notify you. It doesn't work particularly well. But there are some delightful aspects that create excitement about the product. And those are the things that create that additional value, that additional wow factor that gets you noticed in the marketplace, that gets you more Facebook likes, that gets you more Net Promoter Scores, because people talk about those things that they're elated about, not about the things that are just expected to be delivered as a basic form of the product. So Pricing is not about just picking a number at all, right? Some people say, well, pricing, just throw a dart at the wall and that's probably good enough. If you price too low, you're stuck with that price. Two things may happen. One is you actually may convey that your product value is not as great as it should be. The second thing is you're really, really impacting your margins, because every dollar that goes down, it immediately comes off of your bottom line. So you better understand what value you're providing to your customer. Talk to them. Do your customer discovery. Find out all of the areas of frustration and aggravation that they have. Don't ignore the emotional issues. Segmenting is the key way in which you can actually extract more value from the marketplace by understanding the difference between this person and this person if they're not in the same segment. Some people may want, I don't want that. Other people may say, hey, just bundle it all together. The Japanese did a great job of bringing cars out back in, I guess it was probably the 80s now, where they just bundled all of the extras on, whereas the American car manufacturers, everything was an extra. I mean, you used to have to pay extra for the tires. That was a bit much, right? So look at it. How do people want to buy? What is it that they want included? What is it they don't want included? What extra little features, service features, might you add on that make it easier for the customer to buy? Will they pay extra for it being easier to get, in other words, delivered to your door or installed by you, by a qualified service technician? And what is the value metric? What is the price per X that you should be pricing on? If somebody is using a product only once a month, why are you pricing it on a per hour basis? Or if they're only using it a couple of times a year, why are you pricing it on a per month basis? Why not price it on a per use basis? And the devil in that is actually coming down to measurement, and how can you measure how this use is being provided? For example, people rent things instead of buying things. If you just look at what's happening now with cars, they talk about millennials are far less likely to buy a car than they might be to just use a co-op or car sharing. Right? They don't have to buy. It's the same mode of transportation, but it's a different way of buying. Okay? If you have different markets, you will have different price offers for each segment. Those that buy at Costco are not the same segment as those that are buying at Whole Foods, that are buying at Choices. Okay? Those that dine at Blue Water Cafe are not the same people that are going to Subway. Different segments. So what is your value metric? What's your price metric? Are you going to price it price per gallon, or are you going to, in terms of paint, or are you going to do it on a price per square foot? You can bet the customer is actually thinking, gee, how much is this going to cost me to do this room, which is X amount of square feet? So this price of a can, one can may deliver a lot more square feet, so the pricing metric might actually be cheaper, even though the price per gallon is higher. So how is it that you're doing that, and how are you now going to communicate that into the marketplace to indicate your element of value? If you're producing really high quality paint and it gives you a lot more square footage per gallon, how are you going to convey that into the marketplace? So pricing is also key to determining where you're going, what market you're actually going to start in. If we look at the segment that you're targeting, yeah, you can see where different segments are going to be at different prices because your product is going to deliver a different value to them. So some segments may be very, very large, some might be less, but the total value of it is large because the price can be quite high. Some might be very, very narrow. So how do you pick which one you want to go into? Well, that segment might be too small. That one just maybe doesn't have enough value in it for you. If you look at the overall size of the area under that in that box, it's just too small. But let's look at it from a cost to serve standpoint. Something to be considered. What's the difference between your price and your cost to serve that marketplace? Well, in this case, we're at a startup. We haven't got all the cost efficiencies out of into our business at this point in time. And so we want to look at it and say, okay, eliminate this one because it's going to be very expensive. So an example of that could be a market which is very, very diverse, which takes us, for example, I'm trying to reach the small truck market. There's thousands of small trucking operators, and I have a software platform that's going to enable them to save some of their time. But when I look at it, I say, oh my God, how am I going to actually reach these people? There's so many of them. They're not organized. There's no group. I just can't reach them. They're not really, tech-savvy people, so they're not going to use the internet and see me on the internet. Too expensive to get to them, reach them for the price that it's going to be. My cost of that customer acquisition is too high relative to the price. These other ones are more organized. I capture that value. I can realize that. So you've got many options in creating revenue streams, different ways, different metrics, of different ways of pricing your product. Here's a few examples. There are many, many more. The real challenge, I think, that you want to look at is how can you innovate in the marketplace relative to your competition that will give you an edge, keeping in mind that pricing is something that can be easily copied, normally easily copied. But there may be ways of bundling in a service, maybe ways of bundling in other elements of value that the customer really, really wants and doesn't like from the existing suppliers in the marketplace. So here's a bit of a checklist, and I won't go through all this, but you're going to have it all in the handouts or the material that'll be accessed to go through. It just will give you some thinking about what you should be considering as you're going into the marketplace. Keeping in mind, you're trying to find some ways to innovate. Pricing is a way that you can innovate. Normally, it's by bundling in other elements of your service. It's by looking at other elements of your business model, be it the channel that you're using to market, the features that you've got in the product, the new technology and how it's used. Maybe you actually have created a pricing mechanism that allows people to buy in a different fashion that other people may not have thought of or considered in terms of their service. Auctions, for example. eBay was a great innovator in terms of selling things online. Was able to do that initially through auctions. So, how much customer value? This is determined by the market segment. What are they really willing to pay for? How are they paying? How do they want to pay? How do they want to buy? How do they want to be supported? How do they want to be upgraded? All those different elements. Think of every time you touch or engage with a customer, from the first point of making them know about your service through your web page or email or whatever you do. How is it that you can do it better than the next guy? So as I mentioned at the outset, what we're trying to convey here clearly is that pricing is about value, not about cost. Look at the value that you're creating through the structure of your business model. They're the five key levers that you have on the right side of your business model. Which segment you're dealing with? What's your value proposition to that segment? How do they want to be sold to through the channels? How are they going to be made aware of? How can you be more efficient there? How can you support and engage those customers through your customer relationship activity? And then how can you innovate on the pricing mechanism that you're using to convey the product? You can actually often use that to create more value for your customers. It's either simpler, easier to understand, less complicated. All those different activities create value for the end user. Questions?
I'm going to cut off the formal proceedings here.
Okay.
Thank you very much, Kirk.